Well, hello there and welcome to another edition of Warbird Wednesdays. My name is Fred Bell and I'm here in the museum, really on about month 2 being locked in, and as you can see we're having a great time with this. The staff has run with the hat idea.
The name is Conehead.
Cone.
We come from France.
A cone head, so I'm going to take that off and I'm going to show my age. Actually, remember the cone heads. I'm going to toss this to my ostentatious assistant Greg Kenny off camera, who is helping me again this week. Now if you have hat ideas, send them to Greg at education at palmspringsairmuseum.org. Send your ideas, or you could tell him how you're going to send us a hat. If we wear it on the air, you're going to be able to see it. But we're having a lot of fun here, and we've been going down the pathway of talking about weapon systems that have kind of gone by the wayside. This is one that has clearly gone by the wayside. It's a complete exhibit here at the Air Museum, Palm Springs Air Museum. It's the Norman L. Sirota glider exhibit tied around D-Day. And on the table here, I've got a lot of gliders. Now, the concept behind gliders, the Germans took full advantage of the Treaty of Versailles as they were bringing back their Air Force in the late 20s and the early 30s, doing a lot of glider training. Remember, the Germans after World War I were prohibited from having any real armed forces to speak of. They could have a self-defense force. When Hitler came into power, and even before that, the Germans were working around ways with the Condor Legion, fighting in Spain, to test various weapon systems and design or civilian aircraft that were really military aircraft, but under the guise of civilian use. But they were trying to figure out ways to bring back their armed forces. Their Air Force, the Luftwaffe, was no exception. Did a lot of glider work. Everybody around the globe was doing gliders in either training roles or and as the Germans were doing, training future Luftwaffe pilots in gliders and then moving them into powered flight airplanes. Now, on the table here, I have a whole series. As I said, the Allies and the Germans were working a lot on gliders. And I have a number of different gliders, and we'll talk a little bit about each one of them. But I have the CG-4A, the Waco glider. I have the British Horsa, and I have the German Gotha glider. There were other gliders used, and we'll talk a little bit about specifics. But the CG-4A is interesting in that it was used. Well over 800 gliders of all types were used in the attack on D-Day. You aficionados can look that up, of various types. The British Horsa, which were used heavily, the Americans used them aggressively with CG-4A. The CG-4A could house about 24 troops or a field gun. The Horsa carried a little bit more troops, and it could carry like 25 or 26 troops and a field gun. Gotha, which could carry 23 troops and about 8,000 pounds in various configurations. Now, the geometry on these gliders are all relatively the same. They all had about 85 to a 90-foot wingspan. The maximum speed on any of these at any given time was about 150 miles an hour, but the cruising speed on these was somewhere between about 70, 75 to about 80 miles an hour. They were all made out of wood and either tube steel or aluminum because they were trying to save weight. And we're going to talk about what that really means in a minute, but they were, all of them, very dangerous. About a 600 to an 800-foot landing area for one of these, but that could go higher the more weight you added to it. The Germans, especially with the Horsa and the CG-4A, set up all kinds of things with cables and mines and flooded areas to prohibit glider or airborne troops. But at that time, you got to remember, there were no helicopters. This was the only way to get stuff in. And although they could carry a field gun or some sort of heavy equipment, that didn't necessarily mean that they could use it. So why don't we go over, we're going to come back to this table in a minute. The first thing, this hideous weapon, this is the first Fred kind of fun factor artifact is this is actually a emergency axe, exit axe for a glider or an aircraft. And as you can see, this thing looks like it came out of the medieval times, but this was a nasty, nasty weapon. Could be used for point defense, and I've heard about troops using this as point defense, but you could see you can either hack or pick through. This artifact actually has the name, and you can see this when you come to the museum. The name of the guy who owned it is actually etched into this artifact. I think, Greg, I'm going to keep this for my staff meetings. This might be really good, especially with the hats that you're giving me. But if you can look down in here, airborne troops had to kind of go with into this table, had to go with what they had because they didn't know about resupply. So the first we go with German troops, of course, the iconic MP40. These are all, again, inert movie guns, but this is a demonstration. The German grenade. You can see all of the outfits that the airborne troops wore had all kinds of pockets and things in them. These German ammunition packs, but they had to do that because they were carrying everything, their food, their medicine, everything on their backs. German airborne operations and glider operations had a fairly limited history. They started in 1940 in the Low Country, and they peaked out in about 1943. The Germans heavily used airborne troops in the invasion of Crete in 1941. But that was the high mark. Ju-52, Junker 52 transports, and other airborne troops assaulted Crete. It was a bit of a Pyrrhic victory for them because the Germans suffered so many casualties with their airborne troops that they really could never mount a more successful airborne operation. And the other side of that is these things are slow and vulnerable. You have to have air superiority with these aircraft in order to operate them with gliders. The Germans lost air superiority in about 1943, and so that was another reason why airborne drops, they did try to do a few things, but they weren't really practical. The last really successful use of airborne troops was Mussolini's liberation in 1943 with a smaller glider that they used to actually land to liberate Mussolini, but the Germans were really out of the airborne glider business 1941, 1942 for any real operations. We go on to the British. Now the British capabilities, because of Lend-Lease and them built up with the as the war went on. They obviously were in the Battle of D-Day. They were also in Operation Varsity, which was really the last use of airborne troops in March. That was the crossing of the Rhine, and you can look up for more details, but you can see a lot of ammunition packs. The British Sten gun, and I'm not a huge gun guy, as I've said before. Interesting things about the German equipment versus the British equipment. Sten gun really very close range weapon. You've seen a lot of movies where they grab it and they grab onto that magazine. They use it at close range. These are printed, very cheap weapons to make. They're actually stamped, where the MP40 and a lot of the German weapons were much more precision built, and as such, these Sten guns could really take a big punishment. I just saw an article where a Sten gun from the war was found in Paris that had the partisan's name etched on it, so these things continue to appear, but that's the British piece. And then, of course, you've seen the Americans. Again, many more packs of ammo. You see the American pineapple grenade and a folding stock M1. And you've seen these a little lighter round as far as the energy in that round. The American operations started up in 43, and then the invasion, and they were also in Operation Varsity at the crossing of the Rhine, and then they were used in China, Burma, India theater. I'm going to talk about an interesting fun fact about these in a minute as the last use of these, but you could see basically And when you come to the museum, you can look at this exhibit, all the stuff that they had to carry with them. Everything they carried, they brought in. They might get resupply. In Market Garden, for example, with the British troops, which is a bridge too far, and you can read about that, the British troops that got cut off, one of the big problems they had was they landed right on top of a German SS division, Panzer division that was refitting, and the German counterattacks took their resupply fields. And we think about like Vietnam with helicopters coming in and being able to get into their what they call LZs, or landing zones. The reality of the situation for these airborne troops was C-47s, Skytrains primarily, were in trying to do cargo drops. All those cargo drops were ending up with the Germans because the Germans had taken all of the drop zones. So these troops were extremely vulnerable. And once the defenders knew, and this is on D-Day as well, that if they could counterattack and overrun these troops had no supply. They were completely cut off and dependent upon ground forces linking up with them so they were primarily used to seize territory and then hold for a period of time until the land forces could relieve them. Depending on the intensity of combat, that wasn't very long. It could be 3 or 4 days, up to a week, but at that point they would run out of ammunition, medical supplies, and food, and then they were in real trouble. And there is history there that shows what happens, as with Market Garden, when you can't get to those troops and essentially they have to surrender en masse. So, Greg, let's go over there to my right. We're going to talk about the heaviest weapon that the airborne troops carried. This is a 60 millimeter mortar. This is the heaviest weapon offensive weapon that they could get at quickly and use. They could carry field guns, they could carry other things, but depending on how they landed and what went on with them, they may not be able to use them. But when you come to the museum, you can get an idea. The various rounds, these are all plastic, but they're a good example of that. But a mortar, if you don't understand the concept, you drop it in, there's a charge and it launches, and you can lob it. There's a degree setting here. As you can set this, you can lob that charge at the enemy. These were really effective. If you had troops out in the open and these things hit and they fragment, they can injure a lot of people. So you had to respect mortars. Obviously they went up much higher in caliber, but those were land-based. They were carried there by a truck or a vehicle. But this was the heaviest weapon that was typically on carried on a CG-4A offensive weapon as far as artillery. Now, I am going to show you, this is more of a Fred Fun story. I'm going to show you what unobtainium looks like. Have you ever heard of unobtainium? You've heard of kryptonite. This is unobtainium. This is a hull from a CG-4A glider. Now, there were about 14,000 of these made. They were used, they were considered to be disposable. There was a pickup system, and it was called Operation Snatch, where if you were crazy enough to sit in one of these things, a C-47 would come by with there would be extended wires, and it would capture your tow wire and then pull you back into the air. As I said, I think you have to be somewhat insane to be inside of the glider to do it, but they did do it. In fact, in the Pacific, they actually rescued some people doing that very operation. But I think that's pretty crazy. I wouldn't do it, but Greg might do it. Greg is crazy enough; he might do it. But we did not put, and I'm going to talk about fabric here in a second. But we did not put the fabric on this because we wanted people to see the construction. What was over this was either this floor, the frame comes from a CG-4A, and what happened with this was there were a number of factories that built these. At the end of the war, like with a lot of other military hardware, they just took these and pushed them out of the factory and left them in a field because they had no more value. These sat out in a field for many years, and a man who was driving by realized what they were, and he said to the property owner, "Can I have these?" Well, the property owner was like, "Yeah, go ahead." And there were 5 or 6 of them out there. There are none of these in existence. They're incredibly hard to find. They were sold at the end of the war, still boxed up. People used them for chicken coops. They used them to make motorhomes out of them. They camp, like camp cabins and things like that. They are incredibly hard to find. When we started with this exhibit, we were actually thinking that we were going to have to make this. We had the plans to this. When you come here at the museum and you look at this exhibit, you can look around, and I'm going to give you an inside tip here. There's a couple of places where we repaired it, and you're going to be able to see those. I'm not going to give it away. I want you, when you come to the museum, you look at it. There's a couple of areas where we repaired it. Now, what we did do is we put the troops in there to give you a scale. This was the real wood floor. The front of this actually would open up, and what they did, our restoration department does just some amazing things. They actually rigged all of the cables. This system actually works. So obviously these men wouldn't be in it if you were going to raise it up, but the pilot and the co-pilot, but you can actually, if in this one, it actually works. You can run this cabling, and this entire piece actually lifts up, and you can see how they could put a Jeep in there or whatever, and then there's a hook in there you could hook to the vehicle, and as the vehicle backed out, it would lift this again, and that they could actually get out. That's how you got out of the thing. But this gives you an idea of the scale. It is to scale. We put a wing cutaway on it, so you get an idea where the wing was. These, as I said, these wings were about 90 feet, and typical cruising speed in one of these things was about, depending on the glider, 72 to about 80, 85. Maximum speed was 150, but you didn't want to do that. That would be really dangerous. Now, Greg, let's walk over here. We're going to show a cutaway of the wing, and we're going to go to stage 2. First of all, the one thing I want to do on unobtainium is I want to give a shout out to John Goldenbaum and Polyfiber, who helped us find this and actually made this restoration happen. They were extremely helpful. Our restoration crew built all the wood and repaired all this and built all the cabling and the pulleys and everything else. But without John Goldenbaum and Polyfiber, this project wouldn't happen. So John, thank you very much. If you ever get a chance, Polyfiber does a lot of work in fabrics and coatings for aircraft. Send them a thank you, because this project wouldn't have happened. Now, I'm going to go, Greg, to my stage 2. I'm going to put my pencil down for a moment. Go to stage 2, and today Greg has selected the Cock and Bull ginger beer. This is non-alcoholic. Since 1946, the extra ginger soft drink, and it's a Moscow Mule mixer. Hey, who knew? Moscow Mule. I'm going to open this up. Greg did his level best last week to poison me with the brainwash, so we'll give this a shot. Cock and Bull is not a sponsor of this program, so we'll give it a taste here, Greg. That one's going to stay with me, Greg. Another good choice. This one has a little bit of a tart finish there, but Greg, a good choice, as opposed to the radioactive water, whatever you gave me last week that nearly killed me. So what I want to do this week is, on a serious note, is give a shout out to the Canadian Snowbirds, their demonstration team. God bless you guys. They lost a crew member just a few days ago when we filmed, from the filming of this. We have had a pleasure of working with the Canadian Armed Forces on a couple of different projects, and they are true professionals, and our hearts go out to you. If you can, pray for that crew member that was lost. They're a great demonstration team, and we hope they get back to flying just as soon as possible. So God bless you. I'm going to have another swig of this. It's too bad I don't drink, right? We could try the Moscow Mule mixer here, but we might get to that at some point. With all these hats, you're driving me to drink. So why don't I'm going to move this way. And Greg, if you can get a shot of this. This is a cross-section of what a wood wing construction is. You can see the spars. There are tensioners in here, both the nylon and metal tensioners. And the idea is, you got to remember, most aircraft, up until we start talking about a lot of these fighters, the World War II fighters or pre-war fighters were built with this thing. All the World War I airplanes, these wings and the wood that they used was tremendously strong. And then they would cover it with fabric. You can see the various stages where they would put a base on it, then the silver, and then the finish, and that was also designed to make the fabric a little tougher. These gliders, no matter what service or what nationality, were all built this way. And so think about, I don't know if you can, that is all that stands between you and all that AAA, that anti-aircraft artillery, especially on D-Day, that was coming up at these guys. There was no protection in these things. The other side of it was, when they came down and they landed, there was no, they were not very rigid, so they would break up easily. So you could easily figure, and glider troops, they were thinking that, first of all the gliders are expendable. They did recover some of them in D-Day, where they used a whole bunch of them. Glider troops figured that they were going to have 50% casualties. So we have talked about this in other videos, like, that Pacific raid where they lost 115 of 215 airplanes, or the torpedo bombers where they lost 42 of 51. Again, 50% casualties when these guys landed on the ground. That was just getting on the ground. That wasn't combat. That was actually just landing. That is one reason why helicopters and visionaries went so far into helicopters, was the ability to be able to have a more a safer way to transport troops and material into the battle. That really didn't happen until Air Mobile with Vietnam, and we can go into that. We do have a UH-1B that we'll get into, and we'll talk about that. But that didn't really happen until Vietnam War. There were gliders being used in rescues and other things. And there were actually prototype gliders flying in 1945, but they really didn't come into their own until much later. Now, I want to look up, Greg, and this exhibit has all kinds of just incredibly amazing things in it. But if we can get a shot of that TG-2, this glider was actually used as a trainer and surplus late in the war. When you learned how to fly, and you were going to go into gliders, you flew in this first, and then you would get into some of the larger gliders, these CG-4As. But that is here. That is a real World War II participant. This thing actually trained guys to fly these CG-4As. So when you come out and you go through the museum, and we've shown this before, but this is extremely graphic about the risks that these various crew members took as they were going into battle, whether it was in fighters. In this case, we're talking about airborne troops, and the incredible risks that they took flying in these really flimsy pieces of equipment. They were incredibly brave, and they played a very, very important part, especially at D-Day, in securing transportation roads out and bridges out of the landing area. So come out and check out this exhibit here at the museum. And this week, if you are an airborne aficionado, we have stuff for you. We actually have a couple of hats. You can show your love for the airborne troops. Go out to the web store, purchase those things. Remember, smash that subscribe button. We can use your subscriptions, your donations. And if you want to pick something up online, we're adding stuff every week we do this. There's always cool stuff out there to do. My name is Fred Bell. Remember, we're doing Frontline Fridays this Friday, and we are flying on Memorial Day. Go out to our site and check out what we're doing. On Memorial Day, we're going to fly at about 11:30, and we're going to have a ceremony prior to that. Thank you very much. Have a great day.